9-1. What air you reporting? Oh, there's someone or some kind of creature prancing around out here. Okay, is it a person, an animal, or is it active now? Ow. Oh, wow. Arson. Oh, no, mole and or. I can't tell. It looks like a woman, but she's about 6 foot tall. Big man hands. I am sorry you recalling to report a tall woman with man hands. Well, she's covered in butterflies, and she has giant wings. I am sorry, what? Oh, and she talks like a fat, and and ma'am, out of this wood do not desire to go. Thou shalt remain here, whether thou wilt or no, and I will purge the mortal grossness, so that thou shalt like an airy spirit go. Hail, mortals! I come to thee from a fairy grove to bring thee tidings of great woe. Western culture is being destroyed by cucks, and by gender bending, intoxication, and sodomy. You know, things that have never happened in Europe. There's a lot of people talking lately about the West, and Western culture, and Western civilization. But what do those words even mean? I guess the mature and responsible thing to do would be a simple educational video to edify the public. That people demand blood, and I'm thirsty for blood. And by blood I mean dick. And by dick I mean corn dogs. And by corn dogs I mean 16 of them over the course of an evening. And by evening I mean morning. And by morning I mean between 8 o'clock and 8:15. I mean between 8:5 and by corn dogs I mean dick. Who's up first? Well, Angry White Guy YouTube is usually talking about Western culture, and it's been a while since he've done a video response, so let's see what's going on in that part of the internet. Macaulay Culkin is here, baby doll. What? I don't want to. That is a man. Whoa, I've never done a video response to such a powerful wizard. The second and third clues are Elsa's magical powers and the song Let It Go. Both of these clues have to do with coming out. Wrong. Her magic power is the conflict of the plot, and her letting it go is just her realizing her true potential and her ability to conquer and rule her kingdom. She will destroy her enemies and raze their castles to the ground. The song Let It Go is basically, fuck this shit. I'm conquering everyone. So just to be clear, this is a grown man who has dressed himself in the garb of a sorcerer to shout about a YouTube channel for preschoolers. It almost feels like punching down at this point. At least the golden one was mask for mask. Who can I punch up at? Bletch. I don't like talking about punching. It makes me feel like one of those people who talks about punching turfs. I would never punch a turf. My hands are too feminine, and me fingers are tired. Someone massage them. Who can I claw up at? The fundamental assumptions of Western civilization are valid. How about that? Dad, stop. Oh, get out of my life. In me video about Jordan Peterson, I talked about how he posits a struggle between the West and postmodern neo-Marxism. I argued that pomonomo is a label that includes a bunch of incompatible ideas, none of which are in any sense non-Western. Unless, of course, you equate the West with white people and Marxism with the Jews, which surely no one involved in this conversation is doing, right? I'm guessing he wasn't a fan of the bath scene. In this video, I want to look a little bit closer at the whole concept of the West and the people who claim to defend it. Whoa, did nice sword. God damn it, we gonna need to aim even higher. Ladies, gentlemen, and beyond, I give you the President of the United States of America, Big Dick Special Big Boy Donald Trump. Just as Poland could not be broken, I declare today for the world to hear that the West will never, ever be broken. Our values will prevail, our people will thrive, and our civilization will triumph. So we got the most powerful fuckboy on the planet prattling on about the battle for the survival of Western civilization. So I suppose we should probably figure out what that's supposed to mean. Which is too bad because that's gonna require a lot of thinking. And I don't feel like thinking because me brain is tired. Someone message it. And soon, mechanically, dispirited after a dreary day with the prospect of a depressing morrow, I raised to me lips a spoonful of the tea in which I had soaked a morsel of the corn dog. No sooner had the warm liquid mixed with the dog touched my palate than a shudder ran through me, and I stopped, intent upon the extraordinary thing that was happening to me. An exquisite pleasure had invaded me senses, something isolated, detached, with no suggestion of its origin. And at once the vicissitudes of life had become indifferent to me, its disasters innocuous, its brevity illusory, this new sensation having had on me the effect which love has, a post-preambulatory banter. Whether you re in fasci YouTube or pomo, nomo, acadamino, it's common to take for granted that there is a historically continuous, clearly defined thing called Western civilization that starts in ancient Athens and flourishes in our own era of enlightened philosopher kings. But this is really just a story constructed retrospectively by modern people for particular purposes. It's like an origin myth. In an article titled, "There is no such thing as Western civilization," the philosopher Quame Anthony Appiah points out that for the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, there was no such thing as the West. The world was divided into three continents he called Europe, Asia, and Libya. Herodotus had no notion that these three continents corresponded to different types of people, and he never referred to any group of people called Europeans. In fact, he was much more familiar with Egypt and Persia, in which he traveled, than with the faraway and foreign people of northern Europe. So the idea of the West has to be more recent than that. Really, there is no one idea of the West, which is an umbrella term that includes a lot of discontinuous cultures and contradictory ideas. According to him, There are 6 different concepts often invoked under the heading of the West. Let's talk about them now. Concept 1. Christendom and Judeo-Christian values. In the year 732, a soldier named Charles Martel led Frankish forces to victory at the Battle of Tours against the Islamic forces that had advanced from Spain into what is now France, effectively halting the spread of the Umayyad Caliphate into Western Europe. According to Appiah, the first recorded use of the Latin term Europensis, or Europeans, dates from 754 and describes the victors of the Battle of Tours, distinguishing Christians from Muslims. In the late Middle Ages, the concept of Christendom appeared, and was used to distinguish the Christian world from the Islamic world and from paganism. This idea of Christendom is arguably the earliest precursor to the modern concept of the West. Notice that the term itself posits an us versus them dichotomy, where Christians are the us and Muslims are the them. The Christian inheritance is still invoked today by defenders of the West like Lil Benny and Professor Studied the Blade, often under the heading of Judeo-Christian values, a term usually used to falsely imply that contemporary moral norms derive from such a generic, parochial, and incomplete document as the Ten Commandments, as if every major civilization did have laws against murder, as if the prohibition of graven images has And what if I like it when my neighbor covets me ass? Bible jokes. Another main use of Judeo-Christian values is as a bludgeon against single parents and the queers. Speaking of which, what exactly are the family values we inherit from Christendom? 2 kids and a dog, just like the Bible says. Well, no. Polygyny is specifically acknowledged in the Old Testament and not forbidden in either testament. Even in the beginning, Eve could keep her hands away from strange serpents, and who can blame her? And Joseph was a massive cock who raised another man's child. But it's cool, he was into that. In the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church gradually enforced the one man and one woman view of marriage, although in formerly pagan lands this idea was slow to take hold. Charles Martel's grandson Charlemagne had 18 kids by at least 10 wives and concubines because he was a proud son of the North, 100 natty, and alpha as fuck. I am sorry, I just can't stop. The golden one, his soul and mine, were intermingled. Probably because we both played 1,200 hours of Age of Empires in 1999. And then something went terribly wrong. Fucking 9-11. It used to be such an innocent decision, choosing to play as the Franks or the Saracens. Then it became this huge civilizational struggle. And that's why this guy is a fascist and I grew up to be a woman. Thanks a lot, Ozma. Oh, being transgender is so weird. Like, you have these childhood memories that are just totally discordant with your adult gender identity. Like, how do you even deal with that? Well, here's how. You bond with straight guys over your shared Age of Empires nostalgia, and then you fuck them. I'm not like other girls. Concept 2. Enlightenment values. So in 1517, an annoying social justice warrior named Martin Luther nails his list of Winnie complaints to the door of the church in Wittenberg. That kicks off a century or so of brutal violence between Catholics and Protestants. That eventually chills out. But then the 18th century rolls around and shit's just fucking crazy. There are various fops and dandies and macaronists getting wired out of their heads at coffee houses and babbling about enlightenment like the beatnik trash they are. Then, 300 years later, a bunch of drink-sodden fedora tippers appointed themselves intellectual descendants of Voltaire before sinking into sweeping sexual harassment allegations under the rug and making 55 consecutive YouTube videos about how Anita Sarkeesian is destroying video games. That's not what they were discussing at the Parisian salon. This is all very embarrassing, but still, some of these Enlightenment values science, liberty, skepticism about dogma, these are basically good ideas, and they re part of the amalgamation we call the West. But it's important to keep in mind that these ideas are not Judeo-Christian. In fact, they re specifically opposed to that way of thinking. So the sum of what we now think of as the West actually contains major contradictions, because the history of the West is a history of change and revolution. So when a new movement comes along, like for instance a bunch of buzzkill sad sacks pointing out that actually our society is still pretty terrible to women, people of color, and gender and sexual minorities, it might not be the smartest thing to just dismiss it as some kind of sinister postmodern neo-Marxist cuckoldry. It could be the next reformation in a history marked by a series of reformations. If there are any historians watching this, please call it the Reformation. Think about the Protestant Reformation. Think about the At the time, that probably seemed like a civilizational threat to the Holy Roman Empire, and it kinda was. But in retrospect, we see the Reformation as just as important a moment in Western culture as the medieval period that preceded it. But today's Counter-Reformation, made up of people like Orangey Smalls and Dr. Clean Your Room, insist on pretending the current Reformation is some kind of alien threat. And as for the Counter-Reformation, well, that's what you pay a trashy tran to do. Concept 3. Western culture. The idea of the West has its roots in the medieval schism between the Western Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church. But in its contemporary sense, the idea of a Western culture didn't really exist until the imperialist era of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when it was popularized in part by Oswald Spengler's 1918 book The Decline of the West, an important influence on Nazi ideology. As long as people have been talking about Western culture, they've been worried about its alleged decline and degeneration, as I've discussed in several earlier videos which I encourage you not to watch. But the idea of Western culture was influential well beyond the Third Reich. At the height of European imperialism, the idea of a superior high culture of the West was a convenient excuse to plunder and exploit the mysterious Orient. And even though we've swept the more overtly supremacist rhetoric under the rug, the idea of Western culture is still a foundational concept in our schools and universities, where you have to take courses like History of Western Civilization or Western Literature, which you didn't actually do any of the readings for because you were too busy crouching in the bushes outside the Dean office vomiting up a couple pints of Malibu. The consequence of this Western culture education is that we now all have this sense that we belong to a continuous civilization whose crowning achievements are the Ten Commandments, Jesus fucking Christ, Athenian pederasts, cathedrals, Mozart, human rights, science, and phones. But the reality is, this is an essentialist conglomeration of a history that's much more nonlinear than we often think. We in the West claim to be the inheritors of the ancient traditions of Aristotle and Abraham, but the Islamic world is entitled to just the same claim. Saint Thomas Aquinas, one of the most powerful Catholic sorcerers, is largely responsible for introducing Aristotle to Christian universities, but he never would have encountered Aristotle in the first place while ancient Greek philosophy had been translated and commentated by Islamic scholars like Ibn Rushd. So the origins of Western culture aren't really unique to us at all. And the stuff that is unique is just a mess of contradictions. On the one hand, you have Judeo-Christian values, and on the other hand, you have degenerates like William Shakespeare, who wrote plays for men to dress up as fairy queens and make out with each other, which for the record is disgusting, and I condemn it, and I'll have no part in it. Because if you didn't to know, in Shakespeare times, boys in drag played female parts. I wish I had female parts. Working on it. Concept 4. The Free World. From 1941 to 1945, Franklin Roosevelt's vice president was Henry Wallace, an agricultural scientist from Iowa, whom Democratic Party officials despised for being what we'd now call a democratic socialist. Wallace later ran for president in 1948 as a third-party candidate on a platform of universal health care, anti-segregation, and opposition to the Cold War. During the campaign, Wallace was widely mocked in the press for his spiritualism, his refusal to disavow the Communist Party's endorsement, and what Time magazine called his assault on the South, that is his quote, ostentatious ride through cities and towns with his Negro secretary beside him, for which he was pelted with tomatoes and eggs. The poor, knave Wallace commented, "There is something so unlovely about hate when you see it distorting the human face. We'll get used to it, buddy. This is America. Am I lecturing someone from 1948 about how bigoted this country is? This is fine." Wallace received only 2.4 of the popular vote in the 1948 election, and he's now best remembered for his 1942 speech titled "The Century of the Common Man," in which he contrasted what he called the slave world of fascists with the free world, which he described as an incomplete and ongoing international people's revolution. No Nazi counter-revolution will stop him. The common man will smoke the Hitler stooges out into the open in the United States, in Latin America, and in India. He will destroy their influence. No labels, no Mussolinis will be tolerated in a free world. Wallace had an especially left-wing take on it, but it was common during World War II, when the phrase "the free world" first entered common parlance, to include all the countries opposing the Axis powers, including the Dirty Reds. After the war, the phrase "the free world" remained common in American politics, but the meaning shifted. Instead of referring to the International Alliance against Fascism, it referred to the capitalist West as opposed to the communist East. The idea of the free capitalist West is still an important ingredient in this jumbled concept we call Western civilization. So when Lobster Dad says there's a struggle between Marxism and the West, it seems at first like he's just stuck the 1980s or something. Doesn't he know there's no more Eastern blah? Dad, what year do you think it is? Are you at war in your head with the Godin Ruskies? They re on your side now. Remember, the truth is, he's just using the term New Marxism to invoke Red Scare sentiment in opposition to this reformation. But the point I am trying to make is that the West is a concept, or rather several contradictory concepts, that are always posited in particular political circumstances as on side of an us versus them opposition, whether it's the Christian West versus the infidels, the Enlightenment West versus Eli, well, the culture. A barber I guess I have to say something about that. Concept 5, blood and soil. If you ask leading Nazi social media influencer Richard Spencer what he thinks the West is, he'll tell you that it's a cultural, geographic, and genetic inheritance bequeathed to European people by their fair-skinned ancestors. To Spencer, the idea that a person of Asian or African descent could be part of the West is ridiculous because, for Spencer, to be Western is to be white. Now, the thing about that is, as an analysis of the common usage of the term the West, it's not even wrong. Consider Latin America, where the main languages spoken are Spanish, Portuguese, and French, where the majority religion is Roman Catholicism. Why is this region generally not regarded as part of the West? Why are immigrants from this region demonized as alien intruders? Well, because its people have too much melanin to join the club. Or, to be more accurate, the flexible and historically variant concepts of whiteness and the West have been constructed so as to exclude them. And I've already spent half my YouTube career on delirious gay screeching about nazis, so I don't want to do more of that now. But suffice to say, the association between whiteness and the West is always lurking beneath the surface, and when whiteness rears its head proudly, the result is the ugliest crimes our civilization is capable of. As I'm making this video, the machinery of the middle stages of those crimes is up and running yet again, thanks to a refugee crisis in Europe and a racist demagogue in the United States. And once more, both continents were dotted with barbed wire, refugee ghettos, and internment camps full of children torn from parents. The West, in many ways, is an inherently supremacist concept. It's thought to be more civilized, more holy, and more cultured than the non-West. But there are some ridiculous college professors who adopt this story wholesale but flip it on its head. According to them, the West is not uniquely civilized, but uniquely uncivilized, cruel, imperialistic, racist, and genocidal. But this just perpetuates the same essentializing error. Europeans aren't inherently more evil any more than they inherently more civilized. If capitalist imperialism had burst out of Africa 400 years ago, the result would have been just as brutal. So instead of vilifying the West, I think we should get rid of the concept altogether, adopt a more cosmopolitan understanding of ourselves, and acknowledge that the world is too complicated to reduce to simple this and them binaries. Which is not to say that we have to get rid of Aristotle and classical music and the cheesecake factory. We can still keep all that shit, while eliminating the propaganda and injustice that surrounds it. My mind is a predator that preys upon itself. What if traps are gay? What if no one can ever love you? What happiness is impossible? What if everyone who compliments me is lying, so they can laugh at me later when I delusionally feel good about myself? What if when you do stay conscious and then you just err on what if I'm standing in an awkward way and it looks weird? What if Blanchard is right? What are these horrible goddamn noises coming out of me mouth? What are these horrible coming out? Sometimes you just need a break from your own brain, and music is really great for that. I've always liked classical music. When I listen to Mozart or Mendelssohn, or even an amateur like Satie, my mind is lifted to a higher plateau. And I don't care what civilization the composer came from, or whether he was a bigot or a sexist. And I don't want to know because I need this. I need this feeling that makes me just want to take a big inside of my balls. I could be fit to at once. So, okay, fine. He has the head of an ass, but there's certain advantages to that. That's all I'm saying. I don't know.